Printed newspapers, TV programs, the internet. There are lots of ways to get your news, so you might think that there are just as many ways to write about and report the news, but that's not entirely true. There are actually a few simple guidelines that all journalists use to put their stories together, no matter what medium they're working in. These rules are the 5 W's and an H, what is newsworthy, and the fairness formula. And once you understand what these rules are, you'll see news reporting in a whole different way. A set of questions called the 5 W's and an H helps journalists to put their stories together. This means figuring out who, what, when, where, why, and how. This rule makes sure that they gather all their facts to tell the whole story.
When you're thinking about a story and when you want to convey that story to other people, you have to answer these basic questions. So say, for example, take a really big abstract topic like the Middle East or the riots and the revolutions that are happening in Egypt right now. Right? So how are people at home going to understand that if they don't know who's actually rioting on the streets, why are they rioting on the streets, what parts of Egypt or where are they rioting on the streets, how are they doing it? Are they doing it through the internet? Are they doing it with signs? Are they doing it with megaphones? Right? So it all helps to tell a story and gives a person at home that's watching or reading or consuming that news a little bit of texture about the story.
The basic questions we start with for every story: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I always add, for emphasis, the so what. A lot of what we do begins with a what happens, and then it progresses to a when and a where. The most important journalism occurs at the how and the why. And if you cannot answer the so what of those 5 W's and the H, as in, is anybody gonna care about this story, then you might not have a story.
What is news and what makes a story newsworthy? That's a really important question that journalists try to answer every day.
News is different to everybody. News is different to each platform. Sometimes things that are big news for TV are not big news for newspaper. For TV, it requires a lot of visuals. For newspaper, it requires a lot of facts. It's a little bit more in-depth because you have a little bit more time to tell that story in print. Certain stories will always be big news.
Journalists also use a set of guidelines to determine what is news and whether a story is newsworthy, weighing the factors of timeliness, proximity, conflict and controversy, relevance, impact, prominence, and human interest helps them determine the most important stories to deliver to their audience.
What makes something news is it new? Is it different from the way things were yesterday or 15 minutes ago? It's a change in people's lives, it's a disruption. The things you tend to look at are timeliness. How fresh is the event that you're talking about? Did it just happen? Did it happen yesterday? If something happened a year ago, it's probably not newsworthy, unless it's something that happened a year ago that is being uncovered today. Proximity, how close is it to where you live and what you're interested in? Drama and conflict tend to be newsworthy, whether it's different sides of liberal and conservative clashing together over government policy, companies versus unions, or one business versus another, or banks against the little guy.
One of the hardest things we do is to figure out what matters to people. Relevance is a tough call because people can't immediately see what personal interest they have in one story or another. It's something that only becomes really clear to us as events play out over time.
News is whatever impacts you right now or in the future. If it impacts one person, it's probably a little less newsworthy than if it impacts a whole city or a whole community. The more people it affects, the more newsworthy it is. If it affects a prominent person, like the mayor or the president or a celebrity, that makes things more newsworthy than if it would just happen to a regular person. And also, something's newsworthy just if it's interesting. If it's something that people didn't know before, maybe a human interest story about somebody or a place that you didn't know about before. It's not information that you necessarily need to know to go about your daily life, but it's something that you appreciate knowing and enjoy knowing. I feel like news You know it when you see it.
Finally, journalists use a simple formula to ensure that their news reporting is fair. It's easy to remember. A, accuracy, plus B, balance, plus C, completeness, plus D, detachment, plus E, ethics, equals F, fairness.
This is a really important part of reporting. People have to trust what you're saying is true, right? So you have to be accurate, you have to get things right, you have to have the right number of facts on the ground. So if it was a car wreck or a plane crash or even government spending, you have to get the numbers right because people have to trust that you get your information from the best place.
Certainly if you're dealing with stories about politics, we go to great efforts to make sure that you have the left and the right, the Republican and the Democrat, so that people know that there's balance in the story. Some stories, it's more complicated than that. Pick almost any community issue. Say the waste company is going to build a new landfill. There's all kinds of sides to that. There's the company's side, there's the city's side, there's the property owners, there's environmental concerns. So there's all kinds of different sides to a big community story like that, not just two. It's not just the landfill builders and everybody else. It's very complicated. And to be fair, and to be balanced, and to be accurate, you need to make sure you touch all of those pieces of the story.
If you're trying to be fair, you want to tell the whole story. So that's how I would define completeness. It's telling the whole story. Now, you can say that, and then it's of course hard to figure out where's the end of it. But you do the best you can to feel like you've told all the facts, you've talked to as many people as you can, and that you've put it together in the most complete way you can, to use that word specifically, with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Bump Taliban to the inside.
I think the Taliban cause.
Detachment is an interesting concept because we're all human beings and we all bring things to the work we do. But detachment as a journalist means setting aside the biases you might bring in or your own feelings on a particular issue and having an open mind.
Detachment is not a total unhooking yourself from the story. As long as you don't confuse detachment with disengagement, I think you'll be all right. You should be engaged, you should be interested, you should be curious, you should be passionate, and still detached. So you shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that you can't be emotionally involved at all, because that'll show in the kind of storytelling you do.
Ethics in journalism for us really means standards. It means honesty, openness without bias. And when you've done your story, you're thinking, have I crossed any lines? Have I misled anybody in my interviews? Have I misled the audience? And sticking to a kind of ethical code throughout.
Fairness is important because without it, you get into biases. And journalism is struggling today with this issue of fairness because a lot of people are simply espousing opinions and passing it off as news. Anybody can throw up a web page, anybody can tweet out information or put it on Facebook, and the person who is not savvy about where information is coming from will be tempted to believe whatever they read. And it's up to traditional journalism to step in and say, yes, we know you heard A, but here is B, and here's how A and B work together, and here's why you ought to listen to what we're having to say about it.
All journalism is based on these 3 basic rules: the 5 W's and an H, what is newsworthy, and the fairness formula. The next time you read a news story or watch a news report, look and listen a little more closely to see if the reporter did a good job on following these rules.